Please welcome Kirby Dick. Well, I've had my opportunity to talk to Kirby. I'm going to ask him some questions, but I'm hoping that we don't have a lot of time, but I'm hoping that you'll be able to join us again. Just step up to those microphones if you have a comment or a question. I guess, Kirby Dick, I wanted to start by, I guess it's sort of a broader question, not just about this film, but the films that you've done. When you embark on a project, do you think about it as a kind of artistic idea, or do you think about it more as an activist idea? And when you do these things, do you think they're going to make a difference in some kind of sense in that way?
Well, actually, I think about it from both perspectives. Yeah. I mean, I'm a filmmaker, and I'm looking for subject matter and material that I can make a powerful cinematic experience. And at the same time, I'm looking to try to make a film that can make an impact. In fact, I'm not only looking for I'm not only looking for material to make a film about, but I'm looking for material where the film actually can get in and somehow create change. And there's a lot of really great films made where you can tell that the needle doesn't move at all. And so you spend 2-3 years on a film. I wanted to kind of strategically think how I can find the material and find a way to attack that material that can actually move things. And so that's what I'm looking for. Yeah. And actually, I look at that from a broader sort of artistic ambition, where I think that part of the activism is all part and parcel with the artistic ambition. I mean, it's more complex, it's more ambitious.
Did you? What were your expectations in terms of a reaction to this particular film? I mean, you knew what the culture was like. You knew the sense of resistance you were getting. So what were your expectations at the end, and what are they? What's the reaction been? How are you thinking about that?
Well, I knew it would be explosive. I mean, my collaborator Amy Ziering and I, we interviewed over 100 people, and every time you hear the same stories, I mean, we'd walk out and Amy would be just emotionally devastated. She did the interviews. I mean, I think she did a phenomenal job. And I would be extremely enraged. And I think that is what this film is. It's a combination of those two emotions. And so I kind of had a sense that it would, once people saw it, they would, feel those same emotions. But I didn't think it would cause the kind of change that it did. I mean, the Department of Defense is so entrenched. I just thought that they would respond to this the way they've always responded. They've responded in the past to this issue. But yeah. Things have really changed. I mean, I think there was a poll about 6 months ago that said that 70% of the country felt that this issue was an important issue. And I think when we were making the film, don't think 7% of the country was aware that it was an important issue. Yeah. And then even now there are, 16, 18 major pieces of legislation that are being considered by the House and the Senate, most of which I think will go through in one form or another. And none of those, when I was making the film, was even on the table.
When we talked...
Thank you.
One of the things you said when we spoke before on the radio was that you thought that the military could change, mostly because you said, look, it's a hierarchical organization. When people tell them to change, to react, racial integration is one of the things you mentioned. You figured that would just happen. Do you still feel that way?
Well, they are changing in some regards. I mean, they've made this a priority in terms of education. I mean, the film is being used. Hundreds of thousands of men and women in the military have seen the film. Many of them probably without me seeing a penny from it, but that's fine. Right. I mean, that's what the film was for. We know, for example, that the Chief of Staff of the Air Force flew all, it's like 160, I'm not sure, I don't remember the number now, wing commanders from around the globe back to the Pentagon to watch the film and discuss the issue. And we talked to a 3-star who'd been there for 35 years, and he said in his entire career that had never happened before. So they are taking the issue very seriously. What they're not really focusing on yet in the way that they should is the prosecution side of things. Yeah. They still aren't. I think they realize it, but I don't think they want to admit it, that they have embedded serial predators. And certainly education is an important part of that. But perhaps more important is, the investigation and prosecution of those predators.
We should mention one of those pieces of legislation, Senator Kirsten Gillibrand of New York. She was trying to deal with this prosecution question because this is one of the things that the film gets to, is this idea that you've got commanding officers who are making these decisions about whether to prosecute. She got a lot of resistance to the bill. It was amended, didn't end up in the form they wanted, and most of the military said they were really deeply concerned about the chain of command. How did you react to that? What do you make of that? That seems to be a resistance that it's going to be tough to get through.
Yeah, well, it's close. I mean, Senator Gillibrand will bring it up on the floor this fall when it comes up again. And she has, I think, something like 40, 45 sponsors now. But
we should say Ted Cruz, by the way.
Ted Cruz, Ron Paul, yes, are part of it. So it's an interesting bipartisan coalition. Yeah. But I think it's the chiefs of staff who really are digging in their heels on this, and these are the people who it was under their watch that 20, 30, 40 years of these sexual assaults happened. So I don't really think that we can trust their evaluation of it. But they say that if you take it out of the chain of command, good order, the force will lose its good order and discipline. Well, it's evident that it has lost that. And so I think the real problem is they're looking at it from a tops-down perspective. They're thinking we can just mandate this and this will all change. The real problem here is the reporting. Is less than 10% now of men and women are reporting their sexual assaults. And if they don't report, then the prosecution can't happen. And so, and if you're at the bottom of the chain of command and you look into this, huge institution that you're completely fearful of in many ways, and you're trained to be very respectful of it, you don't want to report. That's why it's so important that it be taken outside of the chain of command, so that you're not reporting to your boss's boss or your boss's boss's boss or someone who you think might know your boss. I mean, might know your perpetrators. So, this is I think until they address this issue of reporting, they will continue to have this problem. And the other thing about reporting is, if only 10% of the people are reporting that we know that most of these assaults are caused by serial predators. You can't really. It's very hard to prosecute a serial predator because it's so much easier if you have 2, 3, 4, or 5 assaults. And if you only have 10% reporting, you're never going to get those kind of numbers to go after these predators.
One thing that you had talked about was that it's more than just changing a culture. That's one of the things that comes up. It's that there's something about the culture that encourages maybe something like this, or it's a hiding place for these predators.
Yeah, I think that's important. I mean, yes, there's no question about it. There's a misogyny in the military. There's a misogyny in society, but most men in the military are not rapists. Most commanders are horrified by this. I mean, the real thing is it's these serial predators that have been allowed to operate in an environment which is very conducive to it, and particularly with the situation where what happens is there's a lot of alcohol around, and serial predators are very skilled at picking out their victim, getting them drunk, isolating them, assaulting them. Oftentimes they choose people who are perhaps having problems, and they befriend them, actually. So it seems like this person, and many of these assaults happen in training environments, and which we've seen with Lackland, where somebody's who's just left boot camp, they feel kind of lost moving into their first training environment, and somebody of a higher rank comes to them and said, "Look, I'll show you the ropes." They've come out feeling like they'll take a bullet for their brother or sister, and so they're completely trusting, and it's in that environment that a serial predator can really operate.
It was early last month, President Obama made a statement mentioning, and he's made a few.
Right.
Said something in May, I think, said something again in August, saying that he's committed as commander-in-chief to combating sexual assaults in the military, said that this message was coming all the way from the top. What do you think about the reaction of the president?
Well, I think it's good that he spoke out. I mean, that is historic. I mean, we've never had those kind of strong statements coming from the commander-in-chief. But again, Secretary Hagel is still aligned with the chiefs of staff on this, and so obviously, the president hasn't really taken the bold step that needs to be taken here. So, hopefully this will get through the Senate. I mean, it's important that, in the state of Utah, I think you have, I'm just trying to think of, I actually don't know the position of your senators. Does anybody know the position of your senators on this issue? Are they vocally, have they definitely both come out against it? Well, that's a difference. That's a difference because a lot of people are sitting, particularly Republicans, are sitting on the sideline right now. And I think this is an issue where I think pressure on Republicans particularly can be very, very persuasive. So I would encourage you to get in contact with your senators because this is, every vote counts. It's very close. We may have to get this to 60 votes because the Democratic leadership might insist that it go to 60, that there's a supermajority. Again, keep in mind that, the leadership, particularly on the Senate Armed Services Committee, many of those people, like Carl Levin, otherwise a very good senator, have been there for years and years, sometimes decades. And again, it was under their watch that all these previous hearings happened and nothing was done. So this in some ways is not just a Democrat or Republican issue at all. I mean, this is an issue where I think Republicans see, if you can be very much, pro-military, pro-defense, and and also tough on crime. So I think contact your two senators. There's a possibility you might get one. It could make the difference.
Anyone have questions? Something to say? Yes.
One thing that I haven't seen covered in any of the media about this is the use of civil tort for the victims to go after the perpetrators after they've left the military. Have you hear anything about that? It's not in your film, and I wouldn't expect it to, but you personally might have known the scuttlebutt.
That's an interesting question. Part of the problem is if someone was actually going to sue someone, they probably would have had to report it. And if they reported it, in most cases, it was buried, and then that would be used to counter any kind of lawsuit. That's one thing. Secondly, one of the things that really struck us about survivors of military sexual assault is that they were completely destroyed by this, and there really wasn't. Even though there are hundreds of thousands of survivors in the country still alive, there was really no movement, no coalition of them at all. And so I don't think, maybe after this film, there's a possibility for that, but I think they're just psychologically destroyed, and I think in some ways, trained to respect authority and not to initiate those kind of lawsuits. But I think the other side of the picture is actually harder to initiate because, it's sometimes years, sometimes decades, whatever paperwork that might come forward in a lawsuit would show that, that the perpetrator is innocent, and it would be very hard to pursue those.
Yes.
It seems like this is going on for years, according to them. It seems like what I got out of the film, the victims found some sort of a camaraderie, so the coalition would be good. But also, it seems like nobody there who was a victim would advocate anybody going into the military. Perhaps that's the best prevention. And so, it certainly is something worth considering. I think your movie, your documentary is very powerful. And what if it was shared with, people all over, including elementary school children, junior high and high school? Well, the military would have to take a look at that. Because as a parent and, somebody who's going to advise youth or anybody going into the military, I would certainly point this out and say this is a valid consideration, and it's not something that you would just sort of, mock or think would never happen. So my suggestion would be to share this with public schools and all sorts of youth groups, churches, whoever will listen.
I think that's, a great suggestion, and I think the military actually is very concerned about this. Certainly, Senator McCain in one of the hearings said that he could not, in good conscience, advise, one of his constituents to allow their daughter to go into the military. So I think that this is something that now is perhaps, now is the time really for them to address this and come out and really acknowledge they have a problem, because that we're downsizing right now, but in 5 or 10 years, if we unfortunately find ourselves or maybe 2 months in Syria, find ourselves in another conflict, this whole issue of recruitment is going to be a very, very significant national security issue. Now, I think if the military does get this right, and even the education they're doing, I think may have a very profound effect. Even now, if they continue it over a decade or longer, may have a very profound impact on the society, because these men and women, when they, just like with, when it came to integration, when these men and, what happened was there was a huge problem with, racial problems in the military, and the military undertook this campaign over a 10-year period to really address it. So at the end of that campaign, racism was actually less in the military than it was in general society. And then these men and women left the military and took these values into society. The same thing can happen with this. And because the military is so hierarchical, if it really does, pass these values on, these sort of anti-misogyny values, it could actually really, make a very strong impact in the society. So even though, the military has a lot to do, if they do it right, it could be benefit not only the military, but in the entire society.
That was one of the saddest parts of the film, is near the end when they're talking about the fact that they wouldn't recommend it. I mean, that was really sad, because they had this deep affection for it.
Right. I mean, Corey Still's wearing her Coast Guard. I mean, we didn't put that on her. I mean, that's, she's, just, hates in many ways and loves and still loves the Coast Guard and wanted a career and still wants a career in that.
Yeah. Yes.
Thanks. My name is TJ. I'm from Salt Lake. Watching this movie and hearing these service members' stories, I was feeling this simultaneous feeling of outrage and horror, but also sadness, kind of getting just a slight glimpse of the sadness that they're feeling. And I know with a subject like this, where it's very current, there's almost a lack of closure to those service members' stories. So my question for you is if you have any further updates or where they're at now in their lives.
Well, Corey, this actually happened at the Sundance premiere, which was the year before this past year. 2 people who saw the film at the premiere came up and offered to pay for her surgery. So that's great news. We didn't know it at the time, but she was pregnant, so she put it off because she gave birth to her son, a little over a year ago, and now she's undergoing a series of operations to address that. All of them, have said to me that the film was just, profoundly validating for them. I mean, they were able to take something which was the most painful experience of their lives, the most dramatic, and turn it into something positive. In fact, Corey's spouse and Jessica, Rob and Jessica's spouse both came up to me at Sundance and said, the film saved our marriage. I love my wife. I just didn't understand this in a way. I thought she had this psychological problem that was unique to her. And when I saw the film, I understood, no, this is something, PTSD, these symptoms are just, any survivor, or most survivors, or many survivors of sexual assault experience in both in the military and outside of the military in very profound ways.
Yeah. Thank you.
I have a comment and a question. I'm Chris Gedney, Lieutenant Colonel, retired Air Force, MST survivor, clinical social worker, and I just started my PhD program at the University of Utah in hopes of working with this population and moving the ball forward as far as research on the best interventions and, more importantly, prevention of this situation in the first place. And just a couple comments about very few statements about some of the people in the film about how they wouldn't recommend military service to their daughters. I disagree with that. I would recommend military service to anyone. Keep in mind that more men have been sexually assaulted than women by sheer numbers because men make up about 85% of the population of the military. So I would ask you to think about, would you recommend that your sons don't join the military? If we ever have a draft again, I mean, the problem is there. Would you recommend that women don't go into corporate America because they're going to be sexually assaulted? Would you? I mean, the problem is there. So I don't think that's the answer. I do think if everyone in this room called Senators Lee and Hatch their office, that might make a difference, move them off the dime as far as their position on this. The other thing I would say is I would love for your next film to be focusing on the culture in the military, because I can tell you from my own experience, there is a culture of sexual impropriety. When people watch the film and hear statements about being ordered to drink, when I was first a second lieutenant, you had to join the officers club, and every Friday you had to show up and drink with your commanders. If you didn't, your performance reports were downgraded. I mean, the culture is still there. It's a little bit less now with the DUI laws and things like that, but there's still a culture, and there's still a lot of protecting the good old boy network. I could go on and on about, if anybody wants to talk to me after, I'll give you my card, we'll chat, we'll have a cup of coffee. But the culture in the military is so much more hyper-masculine, and those men that don't fit that stereotype are victimized at incredible numbers. And the women, I'm 5'10", I was drugged and sexually assaulted, raped. It took me 30 years to figure out that was what happened. But the point is, that's the culture, and I think we really need to, it's the same thing as the culture in society in general. We don't like to think about it, it's ugly, it's dirty, but we really need to get involved at every level, no matter where you are, education, corporate America, the military, paramilitary, fire, rescue, police departments. I mean, it's everywhere. So this is a societal issue, it's a global issue. So my advice is find your niche, get involved, and help be a part of the change that you want to see in the world. And thank you so much for what you did. And the other thing is, anybody that wants to find out what's happening with some of the survivors, you can go to a couple of organizations. You can go to the website, Not Invisible. I think it's notinvisible.org,
right?
.org. There's a Facebook page. There's an organization called Protect Our Defenders, right, which is supporting a lot of the current victims in the process right now, getting legal advice and things like that. There's a myriad of ways you can get involved. Just Google it, you'll be pointed in the right direction. But the point is, just get involved. However, you don't leave here today and go, wow, that film sucked. It's a shame. I mean, get involved and make it change.
Yeah, thank you very much for that.
Much.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, there's no question about that. I mean, now, in the next couple of months, this is going to come up, and so, reach out to your senators. Especially, I mean, everyone, but in particular, veterans reaching out, I think, will make a real impact. I mean, no one, I mean, most, unless you're, a predator, no one wants this in the military, whether in the military or outside of it. So let's use this opportunity to really change things.
Hi, my name is Leslie, and I actually had a question for the audience. Could you raise your hand if you've served in the military? In this whole room? Under 10? I was just curious. I was in the Navy for 9 years. I went in as an ensign and got out as a commander and was in the medical field. So I was around people at their most vulnerable moments at times. And they would come to me as a physician with their deepest secrets and their complaints. And I'm actually shocked that in those 9 years, no one ever came to me and told me they had been raped or assaulted. And so part of coming to this movie tonight was I actually felt like, well, maybe we shouldn't take it away from the chain of command And it's amazing how in this film you completely changed my opinion. And I would advocate, 200% for taking it outside the chain of command. So I think that's the response you're getting from the Department of Defense, is just how powerful it is. And the colonel who spoke, oh my gosh, you totally nailed it. The problem is the pervasive sex and alcohol. And I loved every year of my 9 years. I would not take back a moment. But when people come to me and say, oh, someone's going to enlist, I always say, well, you should have them talk to me first. And I think everyone in the country should serve. It's some of my proudest moments, my finest moments. But there's so many things that go on culturally. And I think that comes back to part of my fear about that whole chain of command, is there's so much sex in the military. And so, you think about it and you say, oh, well, maybe it really was somebody, two people having consensual sex. You just fear people being accused erroneously. And as soon as you hear these women speak, it's so clear this is assault. And yeah, all that other sex stuff goes on, but this is so separate. And we really do need to work on the culture, because it's just so pervasive. And you can go from standing next to people in uniform at lining the rails of a ship, attending a burial at sea, and then you turn around and you're at the bar and people are, hooking up with their E3 and they're an E6, or the lieutenant hooking up with the E6, and so it's interesting. Thank you for your movie, though.
Thank you.
Hi. My hat is off to you for this brilliant work that you've done.
Thank you.
It's probably one of the most infuriating, horrific compilations of data that I've ever witnessed, and it needs to become viral in some way. And I don't know what plans you have or what things you've initiated to make this more viral on YouTube or TED or whatever mediums are out there, but that would be one thing that I would highly encourage. And
I heard it's been pirated quite a bit.
good.
That's the good news.
Everyone's seeing this. You're making no money off of this.
And I just, does your foundation accept donations and things like that for?
Yes, we do. There's a recovery program that accepts donations, and Protect Our Defenders as well. Both would be a good place. But I think this, and I think the donations would go a long way to helping survivors and helping with the legislative efforts.
And one more comment. I'm curious to know if you're going to have any additions to your film when you show it, because other than your comments after it in this interview, it leaves one quite depressed and hopeless in terms of here are senators, colonels, generals, numerous people within the hierarchy, outside the hierarchy, who are totally impotent and ineffective in being able to do anything with their power and influence, even in the congressional committees. And when you indicated that there are 17 bills currently on there, things like that give a lot of hope to people that are lost out there, that they don't have a coalition of people. And not only there need to be a coalition of people who are survivors, but people who are just absolutely outraged, infuriated with this horrific travesty that's occurring within our military. And we need to make that known in every way, shape, and form.
No, I absolutely agree.
What you've done is just an amazing beginning. And I think giving people that kind of hope of what kind of results and having those constantly updated would be wonderfully inspiring.
Well, yeah, again, our website, notinvisible.org, you can become we give updates to that all the time, so you would get that. But again, it's supporting Senator Gillibrand's Military Justice Improvement Act now is the time to contact your senators. This will come up over the next 6 weeks or so.
Thank you very much.
Yep, thank you.
Thank you all for coming very much. Kirby Dick, thank you very much.
Thank you.